My name is Velma Richards, 62 years old, and I never thought I'd see the day when my 7-year-old son would be served dog food at a Thanksgiving dinner. But there he was, my sweet Jackson, staring at a dog bowl filled with kibble, while everyone else had turkey and stuffing. I watched as my mother-in-law Eleanor smirked from across the table, her cruel words about slum children piercing my heart. Before I share what happened next, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family drama during holidays. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood on the east side of Detroit. We weren't poor exactly, but we certainly weren't rich. My daddy worked at the auto plant for 40 years, and Mama cleaned houses for wealthy families. They taught me the value of hard work and dignity, regardless of what you did for a living. I never expected to fall in love with someone like Thomas Richards. We met at a charity fundraiser where I was serving drinks as a part-time gig to supplement my nursing salary. Thomas was there representing his family's investment firm. He was tall, distinguished with salt and pepper hair despite only being in his 40s. When he asked for a glass of water instead of champagne, I noticed he was different from the other wealthy attendees. "Not much of a drinker?" I asked as I handed him the water. "Not much of a pretender," he replied with a warm smile that reached his kind eyes. "These events exhaust me, but my mother insists I represent the family." That was my first hint about Eleanor Richards, though I had no idea how significant she would become in my life. Thomas and I connected instantly. He asked for my number that very night, and by the end of our first date, I felt like I'd known him forever. He was 15 years older than me, but the age difference never mattered. What did matter, at least to his family, was our different backgrounds. The first time Thomas mentioned meeting his mother, I noticed a flicker of worry cross his face. "She can be particular," he warned. "Just be yourself." Eleanor lived in a sprawling mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut that made me feel like I'd stepped onto a movie set. The housekeeper, who answered the door, looked me up and down before leading me to a formal sitting room where Eleanor waited, perched on an antique sofa like a queen on her throne. "So, this is the nurse?" were her first words to me. Not "hello" or "nice to meet you," but a statement that immediately highlighted what she saw as my inferior position. Thomas squeezed my hand. "Mother, this is Velma, the woman I've been telling you about." "Velma," she repeated, pronouncing it Velmua, with a slight grimace as though the name itself tasted unpleasant. "How unique." That first meeting set the tone for our relationship. Eleanor never outright rejected me, but her disapproval came through in 1,000 small ways. The questions about my humble beginnings, as she called them. The surprised tone when I demonstrated knowledge of art or literature. The way she would explain basic etiquette to me as though I'd been raised by wolves. Thomas always defended me, which only seemed to increase her resentment. When we announced our engagement 6 months after meeting, Eleanor's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "Well," she said after a long silence, "I suppose Thomas has always been determined to make his own choices, regardless of what's best for the family." Our wedding was a compromise between Thomas's world and mine. We held it at an elegant venue that Eleanor approved of, but I insisted on inviting my entire extended family and the nurses I worked with. During the reception, I overheard Eleanor telling one of her friends, "At least she's pretty. Perhaps the grandchildren will take after our side." Despite Eleanor's constant undercurrent of disapproval, Thomas and I were blissfully happy. 2 years into our marriage, we decided to adopt. Thomas was approaching 50, and we didn't want to wait any longer to start our family. When we brought home Jackson, a beautiful 3-year-old boy with warm brown skin and the sweetest smile you've ever seen, Eleanor's reaction was predictably cold. "I suppose adoption is your only option at this point," she said during Jackson's welcome party at our home, though I must say I had hoped for a child that at least resembled the family. Thomas was furious. "Mother, that's enough. Jackson is our son now, and he is part of this family. If you can't accept that, you can leave." It was the first time I'd seen him truly stand up to her, and for a while after that, Eleanor was more careful with her comments, at least when Thomas was present. We had 5 wonderful years together as a family before tragedy struck. Thomas was driving home from a late meeting when a drunk driver crossed the median and hit him head-on. He died instantly. The police said, though, "I'm not sure if they tell everyone that to ease the pain." At the funeral, Eleanor stood beside me rigid and composed. She didn't cry, at least, not where anyone could see. After the service, she placed a hand on my arm. "The house in Greenwich has always been in the family name," she said. "Thomas would have wanted you and the boy to have security." For a moment, I thought she was offering us a place to live, a gesture of family solidarity in our grief. Then she continued, "I've had my lawyer draw up papers to buy your current house at a fair market value. That should give you enough to find something suitable in your old neighborhood." I was too numb with grief to be properly angry. "We're staying in our home, Eleanor, the home Thomas and I made together." Her expression hardened. "We'll see about that." The next 2 years were a constant battle with Eleanor over Thomas's estate. Thankfully, he had been meticulous with his will and made sure Jackson and I were well protected. Eleanor contested it twice, but lost both times. Her resentment toward me, already strong, hardened into something ugly and vindictive. Jackson took his father's death hard. At 5 years old, he struggled to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. As he approached 7, the grief transformed into anxiety and questions about family. Despite everything, I felt it was important for him to maintain a relationship with his paternal grandmother. She was, after all, his only living grandparent since my parents had passed years before. "Why doesn't Grandma Eleanor like our house?" Jackson asked me once after a particularly tense visit where Eleanor had commented on everything from our modest living room furniture to the questionable neighborhood. "Grandma Eleanor is used to different things," I explained carefully. "She grew up with a lot of money and big houses. Like a princess," he asked, his innocent face serious. "Something like that, honey. But having money doesn't make you better than anyone else. It's how you treat people that matters." As Thanksgiving approached that year, Eleanor unexpectedly invited us to her home for dinner. It had been almost 2 years since Thomas's death, and this was her first holiday invitation. "Jackson should experience a proper family Thanksgiving," she said on the phone. "William and Stephanie will be bringing their children. It would be good for Jackson to spend time with his cousins." William was Thomas's younger brother. He had always been pleasant enough, if somewhat passive in the face of his mother's domineering personality. His wife Stephanie was from a family that Eleanor considered appropriate, and their 3 children were Eleanor's clear favorites among her grandchildren. Against my better judgment, I accepted the invitation. Jackson had been asking about his father's family more frequently, and I thought perhaps Eleanor was finally ready to truly embrace her grandson. How terribly wrong I was. As Thanksgiving approached, my stomach was in knots, thinking about spending the holiday with Eleanor. I'd accepted her invitation for Jackson's sake, hoping to nurture what little family connection he had left after losing his father. The night before our visit, Jackson stayed up late making a special card for his grandmother. He drew a turkey with handprints and wrote, "I love you, Grandma Eleanor," in his careful 7-year-old handwriting. Looking at his hopeful face as he showed me the finished product nearly broke my heart. "Do you think she'll put it on her refrigerator?" he asked, eyes wide with anticipation. "I'm sure she'll love it, sweetheart," I said, hoping I wasn't setting him up for disappointment. The morning of Thanksgiving, I dressed us both with extra care. Jackson wore a little button-up shirt and his best pants. I chose a conservative burgundy dress that I hoped would meet Eleanor's approval. Jackson clutched his card carefully the entire 2-hour drive to Greenwich. "Our house could fit in Grandma's living room," Jackson whispered in awe as we pulled through the iron gates that guarded Eleanor's estate. The mansion looked particularly imposing, decked out for the holidays with professional decorations adorning every window and door. The housekeeper, Maria, answered the door. She gave me a sympathetic smile and squeezed Jackson's shoulder gently. In the 2 years I'd known her, she'd always been kind, despite Eleanor's constant criticism of her work. "Mrs. Richards is in the main sitting room with the family," she told us, taking our coats. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasting turkey, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that this might be a pleasant day after all. That hope evaporated the moment we entered the sitting room and Eleanor's gaze landed on us. "Velma," she said with that same mispronunciation she always used. "And Jackson, you're late. Everyone else arrived an hour ago." "The invitation said 3 o'clock," I replied calmly. "It's only 10 after." Eleanor sniffed disapprovingly before turning to greet other guests, effectively dismissing us. I guided Jackson further into the room where William, Stephanie, and their 3 children were gathered near the fireplace. William came over to give me a quick hug. "Good to see you, Velma. It's been too long." His wife Stephanie smiled politely, but remained seated. Their children, Madison Page and Taylor, barely acknowledged Jackson's presence. At 10, 8, and 6, they had clearly absorbed their grandmother's attitude toward their cousin. "Jackson, why don't you show your cousins the new game on your tablet?" I suggested, trying to help him break the ice. "Children don't need electronic devices at family gatherings," Eleanor interrupted, suddenly reappearing beside us. "Madison, why don't you show your grandmother the piano piece you've been practicing?" As Madison dutifully went to the grand piano in the corner, Eleanor fussed over her, exclaiming loudly about her talent and poise. When Page and Taylor followed with their own performances, Eleanor lavished them with similar praise. Jackson watched the whole scene with longing in his eyes, still holding his handmade card. "Grandma," he said during a quiet moment, approaching Eleanor timidly, "I made this for you." Eleanor took the card between two fingers as if it might contaminate her. "How crafty," she said, setting it on a side table without opening it. "Run along now. The adults are talking." The hurt in Jackson's eyes was unmistakable as he retreated to my side. I put my arm around his shoulders and whispered, "It was a beautiful card, honey. I'm very proud of you." As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor continued her pattern of doting on William's children while ignoring Jackson. During the pre-dinner cocktail hour, she cornered me by the bar. "That dress is certainly bold," she commented, eyeing my burgundy outfit. "I suppose it's what passes for formal wear in your circles." I bit my tongue, not wanting to create tension for Jackson's sake, but my restraint only seemed to encourage her. "You know, Velma Thomas always had a soft spot for charity cases, first with the animal shelter he supported, then with Jackson's adoption, and of course, with you." I took a deep breath. "Thomas loved me, Eleanor, and he loved Jackson. We were a family." "Yes, well, Thomas always did have unconventional ideas," she replied dismissively. William, on the other hand, understood the importance of maintaining certain standards. As she walked away, I noticed her whispering to Maria, the housekeeper, while glancing back at Jackson. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it aside, determined to get through this day for my son's sake. When Maria announced that dinner was ready, we all moved into the formal dining room. The table was a vision of holiday perfection with fine china crystal glasses and elaborate centerpieces. Name cards marked each place, and Jackson was thrilled to discover he would be sitting at the grown-up table rather than a separate children's table. "Look, Mom," he whispered excitedly. "I get to sit next to Cousin Madison." His excitement turned to confusion when we reached his place setting. Instead of the fine china and crystal that adorned the rest of the table, there was a plastic dog bowl with the word Fido printed on the side. It was filled with what was unmistakably dog food, the brown kibble pieces forming a small mound. The conversation around us faltered as everyone noticed the dog bowl. Jackson looked up at me, his lower lip trembling slightly. "Mom," he whispered, the single word filled with hurt and confusion. Before I could respond, Eleanor spoke from the head of the table. "A child of someone from the slums doesn't need a feast," she announced loudly, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "I thought it would be more familiar." The room went silent. William stared at his plate, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his mother. Stephanie looked between Eleanor and Jackson with wide eyes, but said nothing. Even the children seemed to sense the wrongness of the moment their usual chatter silenced. Jackson bit his lip hard, fighting back tears. His small shoulders hunched forward as he tried to make himself invisible, a posture I'd seen too often in children who've been made to feel unwanted. In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed into a steely resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I reached for Jackson's hand. "Come on, sweetheart," I said quietly. "We're leaving." "Where exactly do you think you're going?" Eleanor's mocking voice followed us as I led Jackson away from the table. "Dinner hasn't even been served yet, well, except for Jackson's special meal." I turned slowly to face my mother-in-law, still holding Jackson's hand firmly in mine. The dining room was deadly quiet, the other family members frozen in place like a tableau of cowardice. "We're going home, Eleanor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "where my son will be treated with the dignity he deserves." Eleanor let out a theatrical laugh. "Dignity. That's rich, coming from someone who trapped my son into marriage and then brought a strange child into our family bloodline." The ugliness of her words hung in the air. I was acutely aware of Jackson's hand tightening in mine of his eyes, watching me to see how I would respond. In all the years of subtle insults and passive-aggressive jabs, I had kept my peace for Thomas's sake. But Thomas was gone, and my responsibility now was solely to the child beside me. "You've never respected me, Eleanor. I accepted that. But this," I gestured toward the dog bowl, "this crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Jackson is your grandson, your son's child." "He is no relation to me," Eleanor hissed, dropping all pretense of civility. "Thomas indulged your little rescue fantasy, but I never agreed to it." William cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mother, perhaps this isn't the best time." "Stay out of this, William," Eleanor snapped. "You've always been too weak to speak the truth." I looked around the table at the family that should have been our support system after Thomas's death. Is this really who we are as a family? Is this what Thomas would have wanted? No one met my eyes except, surprisingly, Stephanie. She stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "This is wrong," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Eleanor, what you've done is cruel and inexcusable." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home? Someone should have spoken up years ago." Stephanie continued, moving to stand beside me and Jackson. "The way you've treated Velma, the comments about her background, the attempts to cut her out of family events. And now this humiliation of an innocent child. It's shameful." William looked at his wife in shock. "Steph, what are you doing?" "What you should be doing," she replied without looking at him. "Standing up to bullying behavior." The children watched wide-eyed as the adult conflict unfolded. Madison, the oldest at 10, slipped from her chair and walked over to Jackson. "I'm sorry about your food," she whispered, taking his free hand. "That was mean." Eleanor slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "That's enough, Stephanie. Control your daughter and sit down immediately." Instead, Stephanie put a hand on Madison's shoulder. "No, Eleanor. For once, we're not going to pretend everything is fine while you hurt people." Eleanor's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little gold digger. You think I don't know why you married into this family, for the money the same as her." She jerked her head toward me. "I married Thomas because I loved him," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I stayed with him through cancer scares and business failures you never even knew about because he didn't want to worry you. I nursed him through pneumonia when you were too busy at your charity galas to even call. I loved your son, Eleanor, and he loved me. That's the truth you've never been able to accept." The revelation about Thomas's private struggles seemed to momentarily unbalance Eleanor. In the silence, I continued addressing the whole table now. Family isn't about blood or social status or where someone comes from. It's about love and respect and standing by each other when times get hard. Thomas understood that. He welcomed Jackson into his heart without reservation, just as he welcomed me despite our different backgrounds. I looked down at my son, whose eyes were fixed on me with a mixture of hurt and pride. "Jackson, go get your coat, honey. We're going home." As Jackson left the room, Eleanor found her voice again. "If you leave now, don't expect to remain in the will. The trust fund Thomas set up for you will be contested." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "Is that really all you think I care about?" "Money, keep your money, Eleanor. We'll be fine without it." "You'll regret this," she threatened. "You're nothing without the Richards' name and fortune." "I'm Jackson's mother," I replied simply. "That's everything I need to be." Jackson returned with our coats, and Stephanie surprised me by announcing, "We're leaving too." William stood up, his face flushed. "Stephanie, don't be ridiculous. Mother, apologize. Stephanie, sit down." Stephanie shook her head. "Not this time, William. The children and I will be staying at my sister's tonight. You can join us when you find your spine." She turned to her children. "Madison, Paige, Taylor, get your things. We're going to Aunt Jennifer's for Thanksgiving." As we all moved toward the front door, Eleanor followed her composure, cracking further with each step. "This is absurd. William, control your wife. Stephanie, the children stay here." Outside on the grand porch, Jackson looked up at me with tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "Why does Grandma hate me, Mom? Is it because I'm adopted?" The question broke my heart. I knelt down to his level, aware of Eleanor watching from the doorway. "No, sweetheart. There is nothing wrong with you. Absolutely nothing. Grandma Eleanor has a problem in her heart that makes it hard for her to love people properly. Is it because we're not rich? I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Some people think money makes them better than others. But you remember what Daddy always said about that? Jackson nodded solemnly. A person's worth isn't in their wallet, it's in their actions. That's right, and today your actions showed what a wonderful, brave boy you are. I hugged him tightly, then stood to face Eleanor one last time. You've lost far more than you realize today, I told her quietly. When you're ready to apologize to Jackson sincerely, you know where to find us. Until then, goodbye, Eleanor. The drive home was quiet at first. In the rearview mirror, I could see Jackson staring out the window, his face solemn. Are you okay, sweetheart? I asked. I didn't want dog food, he said in a small voice. I wanted turkey like everyone else. I know, honey. What Grandma did was very wrong. Can we still have Thanksgiving? He asked, his voice brightening a little, with turkey and stuffing. Despite the emotional exhaustion, I smiled. Absolutely. We'll make our own Thanksgiving when we get home. Once Jackson was tucked into bed that night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for today's humiliation, but for all the years of subtle cruelty for Thomas's absence, and for the family connections Jackson might never have. My phone rang just after 11. It was Stephanie. I'm so sorry about today, she said without preamble. I should have said something years ago. Thank you for speaking up, I replied, genuinely grateful for the unexpected alliance. The kids and I are at my sister's. William stayed with Eleanor. She paused. I've put up with her behavior for too long. Watching what she did to Jackson today made me realize I've been complicit by staying silent. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know yet, but I wanted you to know you're not alone. What Eleanor did was unforgivable. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room thinking about family and choices and the kinds of examples I wanted to set for Jackson. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan for salvaging our Thanksgiving and showing my son what family truly meant. I woke early the next morning with renewed determination. Eleanor had ruined our Thanksgiving dinner, but she wouldn't ruin the entire holiday. Jackson deserved better, and I was going to make sure he got it. When he padded into the kitchen in his Superman pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes, I had a cup of hot chocolate waiting for him. Good morning, sunshine, I said, ruffling his hair. How does a special Thanksgiving Part 2 sound? His eyes widened. Can we still have turkey? We can have whatever we want. It's our Thanksgiving. I pulled out a notepad. Let's make a shopping list. What should we have besides turkey? Macaroni and cheese, Jackson exclaimed. And chocolate pie, Dad always let me have extra whipped cream. My heart squeezed at the memory of Thomas piling whipped cream onto Jackson's pie slice while pretending not to notice how much he was adding. Extra whipped cream it is. We drove to the only supermarket open the day after Thanksgiving. The place was nearly empty, most people either shopping Black Friday sales or recovering from food comas. As we searched for a reasonably sized turkey, Jackson spotted an elderly woman struggling to reach a can on a high shelf. Without prompting, he went over to help her, carefully retrieving the can and placing it in her cart. The woman thanked him warmly, commenting on what a polite young man he was. That was very kind of you, I said when he returned to our cart. Jackson shrugged. She needed help. Dad said we should always help when we can. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Your dad was right. And you know what, I bet there are other people who might need some company today. Jackson's face lit up. Like Mrs. Rodriguez, she's always alone. Mrs. Rodriguez was our elderly neighbor whose children lived across the country. She often gave Jackson cookies and listened to his stories about school. That's a wonderful idea, I agreed. Who else could we invite? Darnell and his mom, Jackson suggested, referring to his best friend from school. They don't have other family here either. As we continued shopping, our Thanksgiving guest list grew. By the time we checked out, we had enough food for a proper feast and a plan to host an impromptu gathering for people who, like us, found themselves without traditional family connections on the holiday. Back home, I called Mrs. Rodriguez, who accepted our invitation with touched gratitude. Darnell's mother, Shanice, a hospital nurse who had been working the holiday shift, was equally appreciative of the invitation for her and her son. Are you sure, Velma? She asked. After what happened yesterday, I'd understand if you wanted a quiet day. Word had gotten around about our experience at Eleanor's, though I'd been careful not to share details with anyone except Shanice, who had become a close friend in the years since Jackson and Darnell bonded in kindergarten. I'm sure, I replied firmly. Jackson and I could use some good company, and I refuse to let yesterday define our holiday. With our guests invited, Jackson and I transformed our modest home into a Thanksgiving wonderland. We didn't have Eleanor's expensive decorations or fine china, but we created handmade place cards and arranged autumn leaves and pine cones into cheerful centerpieces. Can we make those paper turkeys like we did at school? Jackson asked, his earlier sadness replaced by excitement. Absolutely, and let's make extra so everyone can take one home. As we worked together, Jackson suddenly looked up from his paper turkey. Mom, I think I know why Grandma Eleanor is so mean. Why's that, honey? I asked, curious about his 7-year-old insight. Maybe nobody ever showed her how to make paper turkeys or have fun Thanksgiving. Maybe she only knows the fancy, boring kind. The simple compassion in his observation moved me deeply. That's very insightful, Jackson. Sometimes people who haven't experienced much joy don't know how to share it with others. That's sad, he said solemnly before brightening again. But we know how. And we can show Mrs. Rodriguez and Darnell and everyone. By 3 o'clock, the turkey was in the oven, filling the house with delicious aromas, and Jackson was helping me prepare the sides when the doorbell rang. That must be Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Can you let her in while I check the green beans? Jackson raced to the door, but instead of our elderly neighbor's familiar greeting, I heard a woman's voice that made me freeze in place. Is your mother home? I hurried to the door to find Stephanie standing on our porch, her 3 children behind her looking uncertain. Stephanie, I said, genuinely surprised. Is everything all right? She adjusted her designer purse nervously. I hope we're not intruding. We didn't have anywhere else to go. William went back to Eleanor's this morning, and my sister's family left for their ski cabin. You want to have Thanksgiving with us? Jackson asked, bouncing slightly with excitement at the prospect of having his cousins over. Stephanie nodded. If that's okay, I brought pie. She held up a store-bought pumpkin pie. And a sincere apology for not standing up to Eleanor sooner. I hesitated only briefly before stepping back to welcome them in. We have plenty of food, and Jackson's been working hard on decorations. The children stood awkwardly in the entryway, clearly unsure how to behave in our much more modest home. Madison, the oldest, was the first to break the ice. Your house is cozy, she said to Jackson. I like the paper turkeys. Jackson beamed. Want to help make more. We're making one for everybody to take home. As the children disappeared into the living room with art supplies, Stephanie followed me to the kitchen. I wasn't sure you'd let us in, she admitted, watching as I checked on the turkey. A few days ago, I might not have, I replied honestly. But Jackson reminded me what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about. William and I had a huge fight this morning, Stephanie confessed, lowering her voice. He said I humiliated his mother and should apologize. When I refused, he went back to Eleanor's. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I don't know what happens next. You stood up for what was right, I said, handing her a peeler and gesturing toward a pile of potatoes. That counts for a lot in my book. By the time Mrs. Rodriguez arrived, followed shortly by Shanice and Darnell, the atmosphere in our home had transformed completely. The children were playing together as if they'd been friends forever, the differences in their backgrounds momentarily forgotten. Shanice raised an eyebrow when she recognized Stephanie from school fundraising events, but welcomed her warmly nonetheless. Mrs. Rodriguez, with her grandmother's intuition, seemed to understand exactly what we all needed, and took charge of teaching the children how to make her famous cranberry sauce recipe. My husband, God rest his soul, always said good food brings people together, she announced in her gentle accent as she supervised the children's stirring. We were just about to sit down to our unconventional feast when the doorbell rang again. I'll get it, Jackson volunteered, racing to the door before I could stop him. A moment later, his voice called out with a mix of confusion and alarm. Mom, it's Grandma Eleanor! I hurried to the door, my heart pounding. Eleanor stood on my porch, immaculately dressed as always, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Behind her, William waited awkwardly by a sleek black Mercedes. Where is my daughter-in-law? Eleanor demanded without preamble. And my grandchildren? Before I could answer, Stephanie appeared beside me, her expression defiant, though I could feel her trembling slightly. "I'm right here, Eleanor," she said, lifting her chin. "The children are inside, having a lovely time." Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene behind us, the paper turkey decorations visible in the living room, the sounds of children laughing, the unmistakable aroma of Thanksgiving food filling the air. "This is absurd," she spat. "William has come to take you and the children home. We're having a proper Thanksgiving dinner at 7. "We're already having Thanksgiving," Stephanie replied firmly. "Right here." Eleanor tried to step past us into the house, but I blocked her way. "You're not welcome here, Eleanor. Not after what you did yesterday." "How dare you?" she gasped. "This is family business. Let me speak to my grandchildren." "No," I said simply. "You've lost that privilege until you can treat all children with respect, including Jackson." Eleanor's gaze landed on Jackson, who had come to stand slightly behind me, peering around my leg at the commotion. Her lip curled. "This ridiculous charade has gone on long enough," she announced. "William, come get your wife and children. Now." William approached the door, looking uncomfortable. "Stephanie, please. Mother has prepared everything. The children should be with family today." "We are with family," Madison's voice came from behind us. She had joined her mother with Paige and Taylor following close behind. "We're making paper turkeys and cranberry sauce, and Mrs. Rodriguez is teaching us Spanish words." William looked stunned at his daughter's defiance. "Madison, that's enough. Get your coat." "No, Dad," Madison replied, a tremor in her voice betraying her nervousness at standing up to her father. "Grandma was mean to Jackson, really mean, and you didn't do anything." The simplicity of the child's moral clarity seemed to hit William hard. He looked from his daughter to his mother, something shifting in his expression. "What exactly happened yesterday?" he asked quietly. "The children keep mentioning a dog bowl." "It was nothing," Eleanor said dismissively. "A simple misunderstanding." "She put dog food in a bowl for me," Jackson said suddenly, his voice small but clear. "Because she said I'm from the slums." A passing neighbor walking his dog slowed down, clearly overhearing the exchange. Eleanor noticed and straightened her public image suddenly at risk. "That's a complete exaggeration," she said quickly, too loudly. "Children often misunderstand adult humor." "There was nothing humorous about it, Eleanor," I said firmly. "You deliberately humiliated a 7-year-old child at Thanksgiving dinner. There were witnesses." William turned to his mother, disbelief warring with dawning realization on his face. "Mother, tell me you didn't actually do that." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "William, don't be ridiculous. I simply—" She faltered for once, unable to spin her cruelty into something acceptable. "You did, didn't you?" William pressed his voice, hardening. "Just like you've been doing little things to Velma for years, the comments about her background, the accidental exclusion from family events." "I was protecting our family name," Eleanor insisted. "Thomas made his choices, but I didn't have to accept them, and neither do you." William stared at his mother for a long moment. "My whole life I've done exactly what you wanted. The right school, the right career, the right wife from the right family. And you know what, Mother? I've never been happy. Not really." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor scoffed. "Of course you're happy. You have everything." "No, Mother. Thomas was happy, with Velma and Jackson, and I was too cowardly to admit I envied him that." Eleanor's face reddened. "That's enough, William. We're leaving. Now." To everyone's surprise, William shook his head. "No, Mother. You're leaving. I'm staying here with my wife and children. If they'll have me," he added, looking uncertainly at Stephanie. Eleanor stared at her son as if he'd grown 2 heads. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," William replied. "What you did to Jackson was cruel and inexcusable, and I'm ashamed that I didn't speak up yesterday." Eleanor drew herself up to her full height. "If you choose these people over your own mother, there will be consequences, William. Financial consequences." William actually laughed, a sound of genuine relief. "Keep your money, Mother. I'm a grown man with a successful career. I don't need your fortune, and I certainly don't need your approval anymore." Eleanor looked from face to face, seeming to realize she had lost control of the situation entirely. Her eyes landed on Jackson once more. "This is all your fault," she hissed at him. "You and your slum rat mother." Before anyone could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared behind us, her small frame radiating dignity and authority. "In my country," she said in her accented English, "we respect the elderly, but we do not respect cruelty or evil hearts. You lady have an evil heart." Eleanor took a step back, unused to being addressed so directly by someone she would consider staff. "How dare you speak to me that way? How dare you speak to a child that way, Mrs. Rodriguez countered. "A beautiful boy who made me a turkey from paper because he knew I was alone today. Shame on you." Eleanor looked around once more, perhaps hoping to find a sympathetic face, but finding none. Even the neighbor walking his dog had stopped to watch the confrontation, shaking his head in disapproval. "This isn't over," she announced, turning sharply and stalking back to her car. "William, this is your last chance." William looked at his mother, then at his wife and children standing with Jackson, me, and our other guests. The choice seemed suddenly very clear to him. "Goodbye, Mother," he said firmly. "When you're ready to apologize, you know where to find us." We all watched as Eleanor drove away, her Mercedes disappearing down our modest street. In the silence that followed, Jackson tugged on my hand. "Can we eat now?" he asked. "I'm really hungry and the turkey smells done." The simple question broke the tension and everyone laughed. William looked uncertainly at Stephanie. "Can I stay?" he asked quietly. Stephanie studied him for a moment. "This is a good first step," she said carefully. "We have a lot to talk about, but yes, you can stay for Thanksgiving." As we all moved back inside, Jackson took William's hand unexpectedly. "We made a paper turkey for you too, Uncle William, and Mrs. Rodriguez says you have to learn the Spanish word for cranberry sauce." William's face softened as he let himself be led by the nephew he had previously overlooked. "I'd like that very much, Jackson. Thank you." Our unlikely gathering settled around my dining room table, which we had extended with a card table to accommodate everyone. The food was a mismatched collection of traditional dishes and last-minute additions. The plates didn't match, and we used paper napkins instead of Eleanor's fine linen. But as I looked around at the faces of people who had chosen to be together despite differences and past hurts, I thought it was the most beautiful Thanksgiving table I had ever seen. While the night before I had cried tears of pain and anger, that night I cried quiet tears of gratitude and hope. Family, I realized, was something you could build, not just something you were born into. And sometimes it took a crisis to show you who your real family was. I expected the next day to be quiet after all the drama and emotion of our improvised Thanksgiving. Jackson was happily playing with a new robot toy William had spontaneously purchased during a Black Friday morning shopping trip with all 4 children. Stephanie had stayed for coffee, and we were just starting to develop what felt like a genuine friendship when the doorbell rang yet again. "If that's Eleanor coming back for round 2, I'm not sure I have the energy," I whispered to Stephanie, only half joking. But when I opened the door, I was rendered speechless. Eleanor stood there alone without her usual imperious posture. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect makeup slightly smudged as if she had been crying. "May I come in?" she asked quietly, none of her usual demand in the tone. I hesitated instinctively, wanting to protect Jackson from any further hurt. "That depends on why you're here, Eleanor. I've come to speak with you, and with Jackson if he's willing." She swallowed hard. "To apologize." The words were so unexpected that I simply stared at her for a moment, trying to detect the trap or manipulation that surely lay beneath this uncharacteristic humility. "Please, Velma," she said, using the correct pronunciation of my name for perhaps the first time ever. 5 minutes. I stepped back reluctantly, allowing her into my home. Stephanie's eyes widened when she saw who had arrived, and she immediately stood. "I should go," she said quickly. "No," Eleanor said, surprising us both. "Stay, please. What I have to say concerns you too." Jackson, hearing the commotion, came into the living room. When he spotted Eleanor, he froze, his small body tensing visibly. It broke my heart to see my normally exuberant child become so guarded, a direct result of yesterday's cruelty. "Jackson," Eleanor acknowledged him with a nod. "I hope you're well today." Jackson moved to stand beside me, pressing against my side. I put a protective arm around his shoulders. "What do you want, Eleanor?" I asked directly. Eleanor sat down carefully on the edge of my sofa, looking out of place in her designer outfit against our comfortable but modest furniture. "When William didn't come home last night, I realized that Something had changed, she began slowly. He's never defied me before. Never. People change, Stephanie said, a hint of pride in her voice. Eleanor nodded. Yes, apparently they do. She took a deep breath. I spent the night thinking about what happened, about what I did. She looked directly at Jackson. What I did to you was wrong, Jackson. Very wrong. There is no excuse for it, and I am truly sorry. Jackson studied her face carefully. You were really mean, he said simply. Yes, I was. Eleanor agreed, the admission seeming to cause her physical pain. And not just yesterday. I've been unkind to you and your mother for a very long time. I watched Eleanor closely, still suspicious of this apparent transformation. Why, Eleanor? Why have you been so determined to push us away? Jackson is your grandson, your only link to Thomas. At the mention of Thomas, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Tears filled her eyes, and for a brief moment I saw not the intimidating matriarch, but a grieving mother. Thomas was always different, she said softly. He questioned everything, defied expectations. When he brought you home, Velma, all I could see was how different you were from our world. I was afraid you would take him away from us. From me. I never wanted to take Thomas away from his family, I said. I wanted to be part of that family. Eleanor nodded. I know that now, but then I couldn't see past my own fears and prejudices. She looked at Jackson again. And when Thomas died, every time I looked at Jackson, I saw what I had lost. The son who chose his own path despite my disapproval. So you punished a child for being loved by his father? Stephanie asked, her voice gentle but firm. I was wrong, Eleanor whispered. So terribly wrong. Jackson, with the directness only a child could manage, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Do you hate me because I'm adopted, because I don't look like Dad? Eleanor seemed genuinely shocked by the question. No, Jackson, no, She hesitated, then continued with painful honesty. I was adopted too. The revelation hung in the air. I had never known this about Eleanor, and from Stephanie's expression, neither had she. You were... Jackson asked, his natural curiosity momentarily overcoming his wariness. Eleanor nodded. My birth mother was very young, unmarried. In those days it was considered scandalous. The Richards family adopted me when I was an infant. They gave me every advantage, every privilege, but I always felt I had to prove I deserved the Richards name, that I belonged. Did your mom ever make you eat dog food? Jackson asked bluntly. Jackson... I began, but Eleanor held up a hand. It's a fair question, she said. No, Jackson, they never did anything like that, but they were cold in other ways, demanding perfection, withholding affection when I failed to meet their standards. She looked at me directly. That doesn't excuse what I did to you or to Jackson. Nothing could. But perhaps it helps explain why I became the person I am. The admission of vulnerability from a woman who had always projected nothing but strength and superiority was startling. I felt my anger beginning to soften, though I wasn't ready to fully forgive. What do you want from us now, Eleanor? I asked. A second chance, she replied simply. An opportunity to be the grandmother Jackson deserves and the mother-in-law I should have been to you from the beginning. She turned to Stephanie. And to be a better mother to William and grandmother to your children as well. I looked at Jackson, who was watching Eleanor with a mix of caution and curiosity. This isn't just my decision to make. Jackson needs to feel safe with you, and after yesterday, that trust has been badly damaged. Eleanor nodded, accepting this truth. I understand. I'm prepared to earn that trust back however long it takes. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is not a bribe, she said quickly, seeing my expression. It's a trust fund Thomas established for Jackson's education. I've been preventing the executor from implementing it. That ends today. She placed the envelope on the coffee table. Whether or not you allow me back into your lives, this belongs to Jackson. It's what Thomas wanted. Jackson looked at the envelope, then back at Eleanor. I don't want money, he said. I want a nice grandma. The simple statement hit Eleanor hard. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I would like to be a nice grandma, Jackson, if you'll give me the chance to try. I knelt beside my son, putting us at eye level. What do you think, honey? Should we give Grandma Eleanor another chance? You don't have to decide right now. Jackson considered this seriously. If she's mean again, we can leave, right? Absolutely, I promised. We never have to stay anywhere you don't feel safe and respected. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment. You have to say sorry and really mean it, he decided. And no more calling Mom names or saying we're from the slums. Eleanor nodded solemnly. I promise, Jackson. No more unkind words or actions. I am truly sorry for how I've behaved, and I want to do better. Then, okay, Jackson said with the simple forgiveness children sometimes offer. But you have to learn how to make paper turkeys and play robot battles. A genuine smile, perhaps the first I'd ever seen from her, crossed Eleanor's face. I would be honored to learn both of those things. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Years of hurt and mistrust couldn't be erased in a single conversation. But as I watched Jackson cautiously showing Eleanor his robot toy, explaining its features with growing animation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Later, after Eleanor had gone with a tentative plan to have dinner together the following week, Stephanie helped me clean up the living room. Do you think she really means it? She asked quietly, folding a throw blanket. I don't know, I admitted. People can change, but it usually doesn't happen overnight. Jackson is remarkable, Stephanie observed, to even consider giving her another chance after what she did. Children often have a capacity for forgiveness that we lose as adults, I said, but I've made it clear to him that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone to hurt you again. We'll be setting very firm boundaries with Eleanor. Stephanie nodded. William and I will be doing the same. She paused, looking thoughtful. You know, when I married into this family, I was so intimidated by Eleanor. She seemed to have this perfect life, this perfect control over everything and everyone. And now I see a lonely woman who pushed away the people who could have loved her all because she was afraid of not being good enough. Stephanie squeezed my hand. Thank you, Velma, for standing up to her, for showing me it was possible. We stood up together, I reminded her, and that made all the difference. Over the following year, Eleanor did work to earn back our trust, though not without setbacks and moments when old habits resurfaced. She attended therapy at my insistence, something she would have scoffed at before. Slowly, painfully, she began to dismantle the walls she had built around herself over a lifetime. The next Thanksgiving looked nothing like the disaster of the previous year. We gathered at my house rather than Eleanor's mansion, my choice to establish that our relationship would be on more equal footing moving forward. Eleanor arrived with homemade cranberry sauce and, to Jackson's delight, a remarkably well-crafted paper turkey she had made herself. As I watched Jackson help his grandmother set the table, each plate getting equal attention, equal love, I thought about how family is not always what we expect it to be. Sometimes it breaks apart and reforms in new patterns. Sometimes the people who should love us the most hurt us the deepest, and sometimes if we're brave enough to stand our ground and speak our truth, healing can begin in the most unexpected ways. Looking back now, 5 years after that fateful Thanksgiving with the dog bowl, I'm still amazed by how much has changed in our family. Jackson is 12 now, thriving in middle school and developing a surprising interest in cooking that Eleanor has enthusiastically encouraged. She's been taking him to culinary classes every Saturday, something I never would have imagined possible before. Eleanor herself has transformed in ways I wouldn't have believed. The therapy she initially resisted became a lifeline for her, helping her address not just her behavior toward us, but the deep insecurities that had driven that behavior for decades. She still lives in her Greenwich mansion, but it's a warmer place now with family photos prominently displayed, including several of Jackson and me. William and Stephanie found their own path to healing as well. William ultimately left his position at the family investment firm to start a nonprofit organization focusing on adoption support and family services, something that has brought him a fulfillment he never found in finance. Stephanie partners with him in this work, using her social connections to raise awareness and funds. The cousins, once practically strangers, now have sleepovers and summer adventures together. Jackson has particularly bonded with Madison, who has become quite the advocate at her private school, calling out classmates who make classist or racist comments. As for me, I've found an unexpected second act in my career. With Eleanor's support, both financial and professional, I've established a nursing scholarship program for students from underprivileged backgrounds. The irony of Eleanor Richards now championing opportunities for people from the slums is not lost on any of us, least of all her. Our relationship will never be perfect. There are still moments when tensions rise or old wounds get accidentally reopened, but we've learned to communicate honestly rather than retreating into polite facades or passive-aggressive behavior. Last month, Eleanor surprised me by asking if I would accompany her to visit her birth mother's grave. She had finally searched for and found information about the young woman who had given her up for adoption 80 years ago. Standing beside that simple headstone, Eleanor confessed through tears how her own adoption had shaped her entire life, creating a desperate need to prove she belonged in elite society, even if it meant rejecting those who reminded her of her origins. "I spent my whole life running from who I really was," she told me, as we placed flowers on the grave, "and in doing so, I nearly destroyed any chance of having genuine love in my life." The Eleanor who served my son dog food would never have shown such vulnerability. The Eleanor I know now understands that real strength lies not in controlling others, but in having the courage to face your own flaws and work to overcome them. This Thanksgiving, we're hosting the dinner at our house again. It's become a tradition now, one that feels right. Eleanor will bring her famous cranberry sauce. Stephanie and William are handling the turkey and sides. We've extended invitations to Mrs. Rodriguez Shanice and Darnell and several other friends who have become like family over the years. Jackson has been practicing a speech he wants to give at dinner, something about the true meaning of family that he wrote for a school assignment. When he showed it to me, I had to fight back tears at his wisdom and compassion. "Do you think Grandma Eleanor will like it?" he asked anxiously. "She'll love it," I assured him, "because it comes from your heart and that's what matters most." The journey from that horrific moment when I saw my child staring at dog food to where we are now has been long and often difficult. There were times I questioned my decision to allow Eleanor back into our lives, times when old hurts threatened to derail the fragile progress we'd made. But standing firm that day, taking Jackson's hand and walking away from that table was one of the most important decisions I've ever made. It wasn't just about protecting my son, though that was paramount. It was about teaching him through my actions that no one has the right to diminish his worth, that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, and that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Every family has its own struggles, its own painful moments, and difficult people. Perhaps you've sat at a holiday table feeling belittled or unwelcome. Perhaps you've had to make the hard choice between maintaining peace and maintaining your dignity. If so, I hope our story gives you courage to set the boundaries you need to walk away from tables where you're not respected and to create new gatherings filled with genuine love. Family isn't defined by blood or social status. It's defined by the people who see your worth, who lift you up instead of tearing you down, who stand beside you in difficult moments and celebrate with you in joyful ones. Sometimes those people are related to you, sometimes they're not. What matters is the love, respect, and kindness you share. If you've experienced family drama during holidays, please share your story in the comments below. How did you handle it? What lessons did you learn? And if you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear these words. You deserve a seat at the table, a real seat with real food and real respect. Thank you for listening to my story. From my family to yours, I wish you holidays filled with love, laughter, and not a single dog bowl in sight unless it belongs to an actual dog.